The king's eldest daughter wed him. Though the human warrior came only as a wedding guest, the palace of Aurelian Prime had never looked so bright. Floating lights drifted above crystal towers, and banners of many colors moved gently in the air as if the city itself was breathing. Ships from dozens of worlds filled the sky lanes, arriving one after another for the royal wedding. Music echoed through wide halls, and servants hurried across shining floors. To the galaxy, this was a day of joy and peace. But inside the palace, not every heart was calm. Princess Alara stood near a tall window, looking out at the city below. She wore a formal gown made of silver fabric that caught the light with every small movement. It was beautiful, crafted by the finest artists in the kingdom, yet it felt heavy on her shoulders. This gown was not only for celebration, it was a symbol of duty. She was the king's eldest daughter. Her marriage was meant to seal an alliance to protect her people from future wars. The groom, Lord Verx of the Zelf Dominion, was powerful and feared. His fleets controlled key trade routes, and his word carried weight across many systems. The council said this marriage would bring stability. Alara had listened. She had agreed. But her heart felt quiet, almost distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Behind her, voices filled the hall. Nobles laughed, diplomats exchanged polite words, and guards stood tall in polished armor. Among the crowd were beings of many shapes and sizes. Tall, scaled envoys from desert worlds. Soft-skinned traders from ocean planets. And almost unnoticed, a small group of humans. One human stood slightly apart from the others. His name was Daniel Cross. He wore a simple dark uniform, clean but worn, with no bright symbols or medals. His hair was short, his posture relaxed but alert. He did not try to draw attention, and he did not avoid it either. He simply observed, his eyes moving slowly across the room. Daniel was not important, at least not here. He had been invited as a courtesy. Years ago, during a border conflict that most of the galaxy had already forgotten, he had fought alongside Aurelian soldiers. He had saved a unit, completed his mission, and returned home without asking for anything. The king remembered, so an invitation had been sent. Now Daniel was only a wedding guest. A group of nobles nearby noticed him and whispered among themselves. One of them, a tall alien with golden skin and sharp features, smiled with clear amusement. "Is that really a human?" he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I thought they stopped sending soldiers after their last defeat." Another laughed. "Perhaps he is lost, or perhaps he came to see how real warriors celebrate." Their laughter spread softly, like a bad smell in the air. Daniel heard them. He did not react. He had heard worse on battlefields where words were followed by weapons. Here, words were all they had. Princess Alara turned slightly as the laughter reached her. Her eyes followed the sound, and she saw the human standing alone. Something about him caught her attention. He did not shrink or show anger. He simply stood, calm, steady, as if the noise meant nothing. She looked back at the crowd, then at her reflection in the glass. She wondered why that calm felt stronger than all the loud confidence around her. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and Lord Verx entered with his entourage. Silence spread quickly, like water filling a space. Verx was tall and broad, his skin dark and smooth, his eyes glowing faintly red. His armor was ceremonial but heavy, marked with symbols of conquest. Each step he took felt deliberate, as if he wanted the floor to remember him. He smiled as he approached the king, bowing just enough to appear respectful. "My king," Verx said, "your palace honors me." The king returned the greeting, his face carefully neutral. "We welcome you, Lord Verx. May this union bring peace to our people." Alara stood beside her father, her expression composed. When Verx looked at her, his gaze lingered, measuring rather than admiring. She felt a cold pressure in her chest but did not move away. Across the hall, Daniel watched the exchange. He noticed the way Verx's guards spread out, how they scanned exits, how their hands stayed close to concealed weapons. This was not the behavior of guests who trusted their hosts. Old habits stirred in him. As the evening continued, the hall filled with music and movement. Servants offered drinks and food from many worlds. Conversations grew louder, lighter on the surface, but Daniel heard tension under the words. Alliances were fragile things. A young officer from Aurelian approached Daniel, his tone polite but uncertain. You are the human, yes. Daniel Cross. Daniel nodded. That's right. The officer hesitated, then said, I heard you served during the Carson Line conflict. Yes. That was a difficult time, the officer said. Many of us did not expect humans to last long. Daniel smiled faintly. Neither did we. The officer laughed a little awkwardly, then excused himself. Not far away, Princess Alara had moved among the guests, offering practiced smiles and gentle words. When she passed near Daniel, her steps slowed. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Thank you for coming, she said, surprising herself with how sincere her voice sounded. I wouldn't miss it, Daniel replied. It's an honor to be here. There was no flattery in his words, only truth. Before she could say more, Verx appeared at her side. My future bride, he said smoothly, placing a hand just close enough to feel like a claim. The guests admire you. Alara nodded and allowed herself to be guided away. As she left, she glanced back once. Daniel was already looking elsewhere, giving her space. That somehow made her chest tighten. Later that night, as preparations continued for the next day's ceremony, the palace corridors grew quieter. Daniel walked alone through a side hall, following signs toward the guest quarters. The lights here were dimmer, the air cooler. That was when he heard it, a sharp sound, metal scraping stone, a breath held too long. Daniel stopped. From a shadowed alcove ahead, a figure moved, too fast for a servant, too silent for a drunk guest. Daniel stepped back, his hand rising calmly. You don't want to do this, he said. The figure lunged anyway. Daniel reacted without thought. He twisted aside, grabbed the attacker's arm, and used their momentum to send them crashing into the wall. A small blade clattered to the floor. Before the attacker could recover, palace guards rushed in, weapons raised. The would-be assassin was restrained, struggling and hissing in a language Daniel did not know. The guards stared at Daniel, shock clear on their faces. How did you? One began. I heard him, Daniel said simply. You might want to check who sent him. News of the incident spread quickly, though quietly. By morning, whispers filled the palace. Someone had tried to kill the king, and a human guest had stopped it. In a private chamber, Princess Alara sat with her father as advisors spoke in low voices. When she heard Daniel's name, she looked up sharply. The human? She asked. Yes, the king said slowly. It seems he acted without hesitation, without orders. Alara thought of his calm eyes, his steady voice. Outside the chamber, Daniel waited, unaware that his quiet presence had already begun to change the shape of the wedding. He had come only as a guest. But fate, as always, had other plans. The morning after the failed attack, the palace felt different. The lights were still bright, and the banners still moved gently in the air, but tension hid beneath everything. Guards doubled their patrols. Doors that were once open now required clearance. Smiles came slower, and conversations ended quickly when footsteps approached. Daniel Cross woke early in his guest chamber. He sat on the edge of the bed, tying his boots with steady hands. He had slept lightly, the way he always did after danger passed close. His body remembered threats even when his mind tried to rest. A soft chime sounded at his door. He stood, checked the small hallway scanner, and opened it carefully. An Aurelian guard officer stood outside, posture straight but eyes tired. Daniel Cross, the officer said. The king requests your presence. Daniel nodded. Lead the way. As they walked through the palace, Daniel noticed changes he would not have seen if he were only a guest. Defensive drones hovered near ceilings. Snipers watched from hidden balconies. The palace was preparing for more trouble. They entered a private council chamber. Inside were the king, Princess Alara, and several senior advisors. When Daniel stepped in, the room went quiet. The king studied him for a long moment. "You saved my life," the king said at last. "You acted before my guards could respond." Daniel shifted his weight slightly. "I was in the wrong place at the right time." "That is not modesty," one advisor said sharply. "That is avoidance." The king raised a hand, silencing him. "Tell me what you saw," Daniel explained calmly. "The sound that did not belong, the movement that felt wrong, the way the attacker tried to strike quickly and disappear. He did not exaggerate, and he did not hide details." When he finished, the room was quiet again. Princess Alara watched him closely. He spoke as if describing the weather, not an attempt on a king's life. There was no pride in him, no fear either. "That assassin," the king said slowly, "was not acting alone." Daniel met his eyes. "No, your majesty, he was testing your defenses." One advisor leaned forward. "Testing?" "Yes," Daniel said. "If he had succeeded, the wedding would have ended before it began. If he failed, he would still reveal your response time, guard patterns, and internal security." The room grew colder. Lord Verx's name was not spoken, but everyone thought it. The king dismissed the advisors and asked Daniel to remain. When they were alone, Alara spoke. "You could have left," she said. "After last night." Daniel shrugged lightly. "The invitation didn't say I could leave early." She almost smiled. The king folded his hands. "I will not force you to stay," he said, "but I ask you to remain close, not as a guard, as an observer." Daniel nodded once. "I can do that." When he left the chamber, Alara watched him go. Something inside her shifted. For the first time since the engagement was announced, she felt a small sense of control return. Later that day, pre-wedding ceremonies resumed. Lord Verx walked through the palace as if nothing had happened. His laughter was loud, his confidence unshaken. But his eyes were sharper now, always counting, always watching. During a public gathering in the central hall, Verx noticed Daniel standing near the back. "So," Verx said loudly, drawing attention, "this is the human everyone is whispering about." Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. Daniel remained still. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said evenly. Verx laughed. "Trouble, no, you provided entertainment." A guest playing hero. Some nobles laughed with him. Verx stepped closer. "Tell me, human, is it true that your kind fights without honor, that you rely on surprise because you lack strength?" Daniel looked at him calmly. "We rely on results." The laughter faded. Verx's smile tightened. "Careful, you speak to your future queen's husband." Daniel met his gaze. "I speak to someone who should be careful who he underestimates." The hall went silent. Princess Alara felt her breath catch. No one spoke to Verx that way. No one survived doing so. Verx stared at Daniel for a long second, then laughed again, louder than before. "Interesting," he said. "Very interesting." He turned away, but his eyes were cold. That evening, Alara could not sleep. She walked through a quiet garden inside the palace, glowing plants lighting her path. She did not notice Daniel until he stepped out from behind a stone pillar. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said quickly. "It's all right," she replied. "I come here to think." They stood in silence for a moment. "You spoke bravely today," she said. "I spoke honestly," Daniel replied. She looked at him. "Do you believe this marriage will bring peace?" Daniel did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was gentle. "I believe peace built on fear doesn't last." Her shoulders lowered slightly, as if she had been carrying weight too long. "He frightens me," she admitted quietly. "Not openly, but in the small ways, the way he looks at people, the way he expects obedience." Daniel listened. "I am told duty matters more than fear," she continued, "that a princess must sacrifice." Daniel met her eyes. "Sacrifice only means something when it's chosen." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed nearby. They stepped apart. The next day brought more celebrations, but also more signs of danger. A supply shipment was delayed without reason. A guard patrol went missing for several minutes before reappearing with no memory of the gap. Daniel noticed it all. Late that night, alarms sounded. Daniel was already moving before the sound reached him fully. He followed it toward the eastern wing where several diplomats were housed. Smoke filled the corridor ahead. He covered his mouth, advancing low and fast. Inside one room, flames licked the walls. A trapped delegate screamed for help. Daniel pulled him free, shielding him as ceiling panels collapsed. Other guards arrived moments later, staring in disbelief. It was meant to be worse, Daniel said. This was another test. The king was furious when he heard. He is pushing, the king said, trying to force my hand. And seeing how far he can go before you break the alliance, Daniel said. Princess Alara listened silently. Fear twisted inside her, but something else rose with it. Resolve. That night she stood before the ceremonial mirror, staring at the crown resting on velvet. For the first time, she wondered what would happen if she said no. Outside her chamber, Daniel stood guard, not because he was ordered to, but because he chose to. The wedding was approaching, and with it, the moment when everything would change. The day of the wedding arrived under a sky filled with silver clouds. From above, the palace of Aurelian Prime looked calm and perfect, shining like a jewel in space. Inside, everything moved according to plan. Music flowed through the halls. Guests gathered in long lines. Cameras from many worlds prepared to record a moment meant to be remembered as the birth of lasting peace. But beneath the beauty, danger waited. Daniel Cross stood near a wide archway leading to the grand ceremonial hall. He wore the same simple uniform as before. No armor, no visible weapon, yet his eyes were sharper than ever. Every sound, every movement, every pause felt important. He had not slept much. During the night, he had walked the palace routes again and again, memorizing guard shifts, noting where Lord Verx's people stood closest to power systems and security controls. They were guests, but they moved like an occupying force. Across the hall, Princess Alara prepared for the ceremony. Servants adjusted her gown, braided her hair, and placed the royal crown gently upon her head. She smiled when they looked at her, but inside she felt like she was walking toward a storm. Her father entered quietly. The king looked older today. The weight of the crown pressed heavier than usual. "You still have time," he said softly. Alara met his eyes. "Time for what?" "To speak," he replied. "Or to stay silent," she understood. She nodded once slowly. "I will walk forward," she said. "But I will not be blind." The king kissed her forehead and left. As the ceremony began, the great doors opened. Light flooded the hall as Alara stepped forward. Guests rose from their seats. Music swelled. Lord Verx stood at the center, tall and proud, dressed in ceremonial armor polished to a dark shine. He smiled as Alara approached, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Daniel watched from the side. His body was still, but his mind raced. He noticed how Verx's guards subtly shifted positions as Alara walked closer. He noticed how palace systems flickered briefly, then stabilized. Something was being activated. The priest began the ritual words, speaking of unity and trust. Verx placed his hand forward, ready for Alara to take it. Before she could move, the lights dimmed. Gasps filled the hall. A low hum vibrated through the floor. The doors slammed shut. Energy shields flared to life, sealing exits. Verx laughed. "Forgive the surprise," he said calmly, "but ceremonies require security." The king stood. "What is the meaning of this?" Verx turned to face him. "The meaning is control. This union is no longer symbolic. It is binding. Once completed, your systems, fleets, and councils will fall under shared command. My command." Guards moved. Not Aurelian guards, Verx's. Panic spread through the guests. Alara stepped back. "You lied," she said. Verx's eyes hardened. "I negotiated." Before anyone else could speak, a guard raised a weapon toward the king. Daniel moved. He crossed the distance faster than anyone expected. He grabbed a fallen ceremonial staff, swung it hard into the guard's arm, and sent the weapon skidding across the floor. He did not shout. He did not hesitate. Chaos exploded. Guests screamed and scattered. Energy blasts lit the air. Aurelian guards tried to respond but were outnumbered and blocked by the shields. Daniel took command without asking. "Protect the civilians," he shouted. "Fall back in groups. Don't chase." Some guards hesitated. "Now," Daniel yelled. They listened. He moved through the hall with sharp purpose, using pillars for cover, striking where enemies exposed themselves. He disarmed rather than killed, disabled rather than destroyed. Every move saved time. Every decision reduced panic. Alara stood frozen for a moment, watching him. Then she moved. She ran to her father's side as Daniel and the guards formed a protective line around them. Verks watched the scene with growing anger. "Enough," he said. He raised a device in his hand and pressed it. The shields intensified. "This hall is mine," Verks declared. "Surrender or watch your people fall." Daniel stepped forward into open space. "You miscalculated," Daniel said calmly. Verks laughed. "You are one human." "You are nothing." Daniel raised his voice so all could hear. "Humans don't win by being bigger, we win by adapting." He signaled with his hand. Hidden panels in the walls burst open. Small drones emerged, not palace drones, but human ones. Simple, compact, quiet. They flooded the air, swarming Verks's control systems. "What is this?" Verks shouted. Daniel spoke evenly. "Open source tools. Your tech is advanced but predictable." The shields flickered. Aurelian guards surged forward. Verks roared and charged toward Alara. Daniel intercepted him. The two collided in the center of the hall. Verks was stronger. His armor enhanced his blows. Daniel was thrown back, sliding across the floor. Pain flashed through him, but he rose again. "You should have stayed a guest," Verks sneered. Daniel wiped blood from his lip. Someone had to stand up. They fought again. Daniel dodged heavy strikes using speed and timing. He aimed for joints, weak points, balance. Verks struck harder, angrier. Finally, Daniel used Verks's momentum against him, pulling him forward and driving him into the stone floor. The impact cracked the tiles. Verks did not rise. Silence fell, broken only by distant alarms. The shields collapsed. Guards restrained the remaining attackers. Medical teams rushed in. Guests slowly realized they were alive. Alara stepped forward, her gown torn, crown still shining. She turned to the hall, to the cameras, to the watching galaxy. "I reject this marriage," she said clearly. "Peace cannot be built on force." This alliance was a lie. The words echoed far beyond the palace. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, pride and relief in his eyes. Daniel stood quietly to the side, breathing hard, feeling the weight of what had just happened. He had come as a guest. Now nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had been seen. The palace of Aurelian Prime was quiet in a way it had never been before. The fires were gone. The alarms were silent. Broken tiles had been cleared, and the wounded were resting under medical care. Outside the palace, news ships filled the sky, sending images and reports across the galaxy. What was meant to be a royal wedding had become something far greater. It had become a turning point. Daniel Cross stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The floating lights still drifted in the air, but now they felt softer, calmer. He leaned his hands on the railing and breathed slowly. His body ached. Bruises were already forming beneath his uniform. But he was alive, and so were thousands of others. That was enough. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. "You should be resting," Princess Alara said. Daniel turned. She no longer wore the ceremonial gown. Instead, she was dressed in a simple royal uniform, practical and clean. Her hair was tied back. She looked tired but steady. "I will," Daniel said. "Soon." She stepped beside him and looked out at the city. "They are calling it the Day of the Broken Crown," she said quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Sounds dramatic." She smiled faintly. "The galaxy likes stories." Below them, crowds had gathered in the open plazas, not in fear but in relief. People stood together watching the palace, waiting for news. They saw everything, Alara continued. The betrayal, the attack, and you. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I didn't do it alone. No, she agreed, but you stood when others froze. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full. Later that day, Lord Verx was brought before the Galactic Council. The chamber was massive, floating in open space, its walls glowing with shifting light. Representatives from dozens of worlds appeared as holograms or in person. Verx stood restrained, his armor removed, his pride stripped away. Evidence played before the council. Recorded commands, hidden clauses in treaties, proof of planned takeover, not alliance. Murmurs spread through the chamber. This was not diplomacy, one counselor said. This was conquest disguised as marriage. The verdict came swiftly. The Zelth Dominion was sanctioned. Their fleets were restricted, their influence cut. Verx was removed from power and taken into custody. Across the galaxy, reactions followed. Some were shocked, some were relieved, many were afraid, and many were curious about one thing: the human. Back on Aurelian Prime, the king addressed his people from the Grand Hall. Cameras hovered, broadcasting his words far beyond the planet. We were offered peace built on fear, the king said. We refused. Not because we are strong alone, but because we are strongest when we stand together. He paused, then gestured. Daniel stepped forward reluctantly. This man came as a guest, the king continued. He owed us nothing, yet when danger came, he chose to act, not for power, not for reward, but because it was right. The hall erupted in applause. Daniel stood stiffly, clearly uncomfortable. The king smiled slightly. On behalf of Aurelian Prime, I offer you honor, land, and command. Daniel swallowed. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I appreciate it, truly, but I didn't come here for any of that. The hall quieted. I'm a soldier, Daniel continued. Not a ruler, not a symbol. I do my best work when I'm not in the spotlight. A few advisors frowned. Others nodded. The king studied him, then laughed softly. Very well, then accept this. He stepped forward and placed a simple insignia in Daniel's hand. Not gold, not jeweled, just a mark of alliance. Aurelian and Earth, the king said, as equals. Daniel closed his fingers around it. That, he said, I can accept. The applause returned, stronger than before. That evening the palace hosted a quieter gathering. No grand music, no forced smiles, just people sharing food, stories, and relief. Daniel sat at a small table near the edge of the hall. Several guards approached him, offering drinks, thanks, and awkward respect. He accepted politely, then excused himself. He found Alara again in the garden. It's strange, she said as he joined her. For the first time, the future feels open. You handled today well, Daniel said. She looked at him. I chose for myself. They walked slowly among the glowing plants. Will you leave soon? She asked. Yes, Daniel replied. My ship is ready. She nodded, hiding her disappointment poorly. At least now, she said, the galaxy knows humans are not weak. Daniel shook his head. They never were, they just hadn't seen us when it mattered. She stopped walking and faced him. Daniel, she said, you changed more than a battle. You reminded us that strength can be quiet, that courage doesn't need permission. He met her gaze. You reminded them too. The next morning, Daniel prepared to depart. His ship waited at the edge of the city, engines humming softly. As he boarded, a message came through his communicator. A galactic news broadcast. A commentator spoke with awe. Across the stars today, many are asking the same question. If one human guest could stand against an empire, what does that say about humanity as a whole? Daniel muted it. He took one last look at the palace, at the city, at the world that had almost lost its freedom. Then his ship lifted into the sky. Far away, in council chambers and war rooms, leaders reconsidered old assumptions. Humans were no longer an afterthought. They were no longer background figures. They were allies or risks. On Aurelian Prime, Princess Alara watched the ship disappear into the stars. She placed a hand over her heart, steady and strong. The wedding had never happened, but something far greater had begun. A future where humanity was no longer underestimated. A future earned not by conquest, but by choice.